Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to ask some questions to the panel, and especially to have us focusing on this issue, this new government regulation of the Internet, net neutrality, and especially as we deal with the legislation later on today. I'm kind of amazed at some of the comments I'm hearing from not only some people on the panel, but some of my colleagues on the other side. I'm a computer science major, and I've watched as this industry has thrived probably more than any other industry in the world. And it's thrived because the government hasn't figured out how to regulate it, how to mess it up. And yet you've got now a rule coming in by the FCC, this new net neutrality, where the government's coming in and saying, we're going to fix the Internet. We're going to come in with regulations to fix the Internet. Because, boy, if you look all across this country, all the problems our country's facing, if the president really was focused on what the real problems of the country are, to be focused on creating jobs. And if you want to go and find a good template of how to create jobs, go look at the Internet. Go look at these great innovative companies. Go look at these great innovators who dropped out of college and are now billionaires because the federal government hadn't figured out how to regulate in a way that somebody can do just that, can innovate in a way that Ms. Chase and so many others have innovated. And so now you've got the FCC coming in and saying, we're going to regulate, and people are actually saying, it's good that the FCC is regulating it to keep the status quo. Well, first of all, it's the other format, the non-regulated format that allowed all of this innovation. That's still to this day, by the way, it's not over. Unfortunately, with the FCC's coming in, there is a big concern in industry of the people who actually invest billions of dollars. And I want to ask you, starting off, Mr. Ciccone, your company is one of the many companies who's invested tremendously. We had testimony a few weeks ago from the FCC. All 5 FCC commissioners came before us talking about this new regulation of the Internet, net neutrality. And we heard testimony from one commissioner, nobody disputed it, that over $500 billion of investment has been made to build the broadband infrastructure that exists today that allows all this innovation. And none of that was taxpayer money, by the way. Maybe that's one of the things that this administration doesn't like. It all happened with private investment. How much money has your company invested in allowing this innovation and creating and building this network infrastructure?
I don't have an exact figure in front of me, Mr. Scalise, but last year we invested approximately $19 billion in capital. I think.
How much is that? Can you say that again?
$19 billion in capital in the United States. Nearly all of that was in the United States, and I think that was more than any other American company invested in the United States last year.
And that was under non-net neutrality rules.
Correct. And this year we'll invest roughly between $17 and $19 billion in capital again.
And let me ask you this, because in your statement, I listened to your testimony, and you used a number of comments that I thought were interesting. And some people act as if you're really thrilled about net neutrality, and maybe some people are thrilled about it. But in your statement, you said all of this without any real evidence of a problem. It's still AT&T's strong preference to have no regulation. The proposal was extreme and upset the financial markets. You're talking about earlier proposals, and then ultimately you said the only proposals before us were either bad or worse. So here you've got the government coming in and saying, okay, first of all, there is no problem. The innovation has never been greater, and no industry in the history of the world has seen this much innovation. And so now the government's going to come in and regulate it, but they're going to give you some options, and we're going to give you a bad option and a worse option. Well, anybody would say, well, I guess I'll take the bad option instead of the worse option. And that, to some people on the other side, constitutes you supporting this new regulation of the Internet. So I just want to put it in that context, but ask you, because you expressed this as a concern, there's an assumption by some that the FCC is going to interpret these rules in a very narrow way. What if the FCC does not interpret these rules in a narrow way, which if we're not able to pass our legislation to block the regulation, the FCC would be free to interpret it as broadly as they'd like? What if they don't interpret the rules narrowly?
Well, I think it depends on the circumstance, sir. Clearly we would reserve the right to challenge that in court if something were to occur that we feel is inconsistent with the plain language of the rule.
And I'm sure some people would think that's good to have now companies that innovate, that add $17 billion of their own capital to build out the infrastructure, are now concerned about maybe having to go to court to be able to continue innovating. Let me ask you, Ms. Chase, and appreciate you coming here from France to participate in this. When I did, as the chairman of the subcommittee did, a Google search on car sharing, your company that you founded, Zipcars, came up. Is there anything in this FCC ruling that prohibits you from being able to buy that premier placement under net neutrality, where a startup wouldn't have that same advantage?
I feel like that's not the question at hand.
Well, that is the question at hand. The bottom line is, maybe you don't want to answer it because you're given now a monopoly. You're now given an advantage over the new startup. I'm not as concerned about the companies that are already successful today that being able to innovate as much as the new company, the new idea that we will be blocking from innovating. And maybe you would like the idea because under net neutrality, Google's still able to give you preference over the new startup that now is at a competitive disadvantage because of net neutrality. So I would hope you would not only be concerned about your company's success, but also the new startup company that's going to be as innovative as yours.
Gentleman's time is expired.
And I yield back my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania.